Resident Evil 7 Biohazard released on January 24th, 2017 for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One and PC to widespread appraisal and much critical success. Surprising gamers all over with this fresh yet somewhat familiar direction, a much needed return to a more survival based tension filled game which is absolutely terrifying. Resident Evil 7 exceeded my expectations in so many ways. And although this review is super late and people may think I have nothing to say that hasn't been covered already by the other millions of reviews on this game, I recently revisited this game to complete it on Madhouse, and it really rekindled that love I first felt for it upon release. And I just wanted to document my thoughts in this video. I'm going to try and best describe my love for this entry and why Resident Evil 7 hit all the right notes with me. To best understand what makes this a standout entry in the series, I'll be dividing this video into sections, as to best flesh out my full views on each individual aspect without too much back and forth. Let's get started with the story. Ethan Winters receives an email from his supposed dead wife Mia, who has been missing for 3 years. One video message the game opens with tells us Mia is away on a babysitting job. Another message plays immediately after, admitting Mia has been lying to us about her whereabouts and warns us to stay away and not come looking for her. Ethan's surprise to Mia still being out there causes him to come looking for her in Dolville, Louisiana, where a later playable VHS tape shows she is being held captive by the Baker family on their rural plantation. Upon arrival, you make your way through the swampland, passing an abandoned van which belongs to the Sewer Gators, a paranormal investigators TV show whose fate you learn through multiple playable VHS tapes later in the game. You come to a rundown guest house where you creep your way by torchlight through the seemingly abandoned remains, investigating odd and disturbing photographs and newspaper reports on multiple missing persons cases in that area. You make your way to the basement to find Mia in a locked cell. She seems disorientated and unaware she has been gone for 3 years. She starts to panic about if anyone has seen us and that Daddy is coming and we need to go now. She tries to escort you through the basement to a way out until she is captured and pulled away. You try to pursue her but find she is gone. She then reappears and is hell-bent on killing you. Mia's dialogue suggests that she's been controlled or possessed by somebody else and she cannot control herself. After this tangle with a possessed Mia, you are left mutilated and bloody trying to escape the house with the help of Zoe Baker's advice. After more horrifying scenes with the chainsaw wielding Mia in the attic, you are forced to kill Mia before Jack Baker appears and delivers Ethan a knockout blow. You are then awakened being dragged into the main Baker home and to a familiar voice of Zoe who reattaches your severed hand. You awaken to find yourself tied to a chair at the dinner table faced with Jack, Marguerite, Lucas Baker and a creepy old catatonic lady. Jack immediately asserts his dominance and shows his ruthlessness upon cutting off his own son's lower arm and spouting abuse at Marguerite, who insists he eat the disgusting mess of human organs in front of you. He states how important this special feast is and starts to try and force feed you with a knife, until he is interrupted by a visitor at the front door. The importance of eating this food Marguerite has prepared gives some clue as to how some of the previous victims of the Bakers may have been infected by this new mysterious infection. From this opening section you are given the information that Mia is being controlled from some external source or doing by the Bakers. The Bakers have been the cause of many kidnappings and killings in this area. The Bakers have some access to a parasite or virus which causes rapid regenerational abilities, causing limbs to grow back or be reattached with ease. Someone is watching you from afar and is on your side, and your wife, who can do this to you, is scared of and being held captive by something much, much worse. It is then your goal to find out how to save Mia from these people, try to cure her of this ailment and to escape the ever-present threat of the Baker family and their labyrinth of houses. From this introduction it really sets up the tone and the kind of ride you'll be in for. Even though I get pretty much everyone has played this game by now, for those of you wishing to understand what is actually going on, or as a reminder, from that point on I will briefly sum it up for you. Warning, if you have not played the game yet, this will contain heavy spoilers. Over the course of the game, you receive more calls from Zoe and find further memos stating that the Bakers have been infected with a type of mould or fungus which once reaches the brain results in complete mind control of the host. The fungus or mould, which is a byproduct of a bioweapon codenamed E-001, disguised as a little girl, Evelyn, who has been transported on a cruiser by Mia, who is working for an unnamed organisation responsible for the E-Series bioweapon. Mia and a colleague are possibly posing as her parents as not to arouse suspicion. After an episode of Evelyn breaking out and destroying most of the tanker and killing the crew like a spoilt brat, they wash up in the swamps of Dolby due to a hurricane bringing the wreckage in. The Bakers discover the unconscious Evelyn and Mia and take them into their home, which you can see further in the Daughters DLC. Evelyn is obsessed with having a family, as she is isolated, being nothing more than an experiment. However, Mia's rejection to be the mother figure in her life causes Evelyn to take control of her and the Bakers' minds to force them into the illusion that she is now their daughter, and what she's provided them with is a gift. The 3 years between Mia and the Bakers succumbing to the infection and control of Evelyn cause a living nightmare of murderous mutilation and sadistic games for anyone who crossed the Bakers' path. Zoe, who has seemed to hold off from Evelyn's control, just wants to have her family back and save them from the infection. She sees Ethan as a fighting chance. You take down the Bakers one by one, with an exception of Lucas, who seems to escape. Being a twisted individual, he seems not to be under Evelyn's control, but simply enjoying the carnage she has brought into their lives. He is working secretly for an organisation who have hired him to assess the bioweapon and provided him with a serum which allows him not to succumb to Evelyn's control. Maybe he's just playing along. Once you have gained the ingredients necessary to create the serum to cure the infection, you are given the choice to save either Zoe or Mia. Both result in different endings to the game. A flashback segment takes place on a cruiser shortly after, in which you learn more about Mia's involvement in the creation of Evelyn, and how she secretes this mould substance, able to will dead bodies into reanimated beings referred to as moulded. Once you have a vial of Evelyn's DNA given to you by Mia to create the toxin able to kill Evelyn, you make your way back through to the house and destroy Evelyn once and for all. A major twist presents itself, as that the Evelyn you and the family have been witnessing throughout the game have been hallucinations of her chosen form as a side effect to the infection, and in reality, due to rapid aging effects, Evelyn was really the catatonic old lady all along. It's even hinted at right at the beginning of the game. The injection of the toxin causes her to transform into a giant monstrosity, destroying the house and towering over you in an epic finale. Assisted by the arrival of a newly designed Umbrella Corps cleanup team, you destroy the final boss in true Resident Evil fashion, with the aid of a super powerful weapon thrown to you from a helping hand. Ethan escapes with the aid of a familiar face, and flies off into the horizon after surviving a grueling life-changing night at the Baker residence. As well as the game's contextual greatness, the game also functions very well within the gameplay aspects. The first difference most people may notice is the shift from third person and over the shoulder perspectives to first person, putting you in the front seat of this avatar, bringing you even closer to the horror. Obviously inspired by the success of other first person horror games of that time, the director of the game, Koshi Nakanishi, sent teams out in Osaka to tour around abandoned buildings and record their experiences. The unease the teams felt whilst recording thought that this perspective would suit the intended horror of Resident Evil 7 well. It helped spawn the whole VHS tape footage sections and the sewer gator subplot. Nakanishi also stated that to try and get the right feel for this game, he played every first person horror game out there, like PT, Outlast, Alien Isolation, and so on. The game handles very well in this new perspective and accommodates the traditional style of the past Resident Evil games. Such as the item management and health system, the game relies heavily on the player's exploration, which means much backtracking to drop off currently unusable or unnecessary items into one of the many item boxes around the estate. To much joy, save rooms are back. Save rooms allow you to take a breath and relax in a space enemies cannot access. It allows the player to rearrange their inventory and save their progress on a tape machine. On Madhouse difficulty, the saves are limited to cassette tapes you find in the safe rooms themselves and hidden throughout the game, just like the ink ribbons in classic Resident Evil. The health system works via a codex that you wear on your wrist. It shows your current health status as red, obviously being danger, yellow as caution, and green as fine. Blood splatter also does appear around the screen to further warn you of your decreasing health if you're caught up in the middle of a group of moulded or taking a beating from a boss battle. Limping and reduced speed also add to this. As the game takes place in first person now, it is less notable sometimes, as previous games you could just tell your character was injured as you are constantly watching the way they are moving, although it does help keep the realism of the situation. The health and item management appear in real time, helping to keep you immersed and also adding to that additional tension of I hope Marguerite doesn't walk around this corner as I'm sorting my shit. Oh my god, she's right there! As well as ammo, health, keys and plot propelling items, you also must combine items to create ammo and health. Green herbs, although doing very little alone, work best when combined with chem fluid, which makes a first aid med, which also I have to say I love the animation for. You can almost feel it. You can combine gunpowder with chem fluid to create bullets, or use separating agents to split items to gather the individual resources from them. Stronger chem fluid can be found, however less frequently. This causes much more powerful and potent creations, such as strong first aid med, enhanced ammo types, dealing more damage, and other types of consumables such as psychostimulants, which for a brief time help you to see item locations through walls. Very handy if you're about to attempt a difficult section but you're low on supplies. The combat can seem difficult at first when compared to other more fluid shooter focused entries. You really have to focus and make every shot count. You'll learn certain types of enemies' weaknesses over the course of the game, such as the moulded sway their heads a lot, so I could go for a headshot and possibly miss, but then get them down in less shots. Or I could take out the legs to slow them down, which will take more shots but then I'll get cleaner headshots. If you're like me, you'll become obsessed with conserving as much ammo as possible, and every wasted shot feels like you've just dug yourself into a deeper hole. You are able to block enemy attacks, which when you see the animation, although again realistic, you think to yourself, what the hell is raising my arms going to do against that? On my later playthroughs, I tended to use the block mechanic a lot. It is actually very effective and made me wonder why I wasn't using it the whole time. You can increase certain traits such as reload speed and max health by collecting hidden antique coins. Once you reach the trailer in the courtyard between the main house and the old house, you'll find locked bird cages containing steroids, stabilizers and special weapons. On Madhouse, these are offered to you earlier, as soon as you start off in the main house actually. One also contains a key letting you bypass a whole beginning area. These coins are also limited, so you have to choose wisely as you cannot guarantee you will open every cage by the end of the game. I feel the game perfectly balances the claustrophobic tension of earlier titles, whilst appealing to newcomers of the series who may not like the fixed camera angles and tank controls, but enjoy other titles of a similar vein. I hear a lot of people say that it's too different, so it can't really be classed as a Resident Evil game and should really be its own standalone game. Although I think it could work as its own title, I feel the creators of this have featured enough Resident Evil staples to really make it feel like part of the family. I mean, you've got a lab-made bioweapon infecting and killing civilians, a huge mansion to explore and solve puzzles within, save rooms complete with music, item box, and saves limited to physical objects, an appearance by an umbrella cleanup team, a helicopter ending, deadly traps, limited resources, transforming bosses, and at the heart of it all, a Resident Evil, one of the only entries within the franchise to actually back up that title. But I understand where people are coming from with certain aspects. I mean, where are the zombies? Where's the secret underground facility? This new style of horror categorises and pays homage to a lot of popular Western horror, which may have something to do with this game's writer being American rather than Japanese, which is a series first. We'll go over the game's possible influences in my next section. A standout point of what makes this game so great are its multiple layers of subgenre horror and classic horror movie tributes. One of the most popular comparisons, and normally the first comparison people make with this game is, it's just like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, alongside other obvious movies, one of the most present visual styles represents itself as having elements straight from it, such as the seemingly abandoned farmhouses, an out in the sticks location, the backwoods southern family with a twisted son. The dinner scene alone is almost shot for shot with the dinner scene in that, complete with the old catatonic grandpa taking Evie's place. Another huge influence seems to come from Sam Raimi's The Evil Dead series, complete with a possessed partner, a decapitated hand, chainsaws, depictions of the mold taking control by black veins appearing. It even has a catchphrase from Ash's character. Groovy. Groovy. These two seem to be the most obvious influences. However, you can argue many other titles can be thrown alongside their subgenre counterpart. For example, the game features torture, with the obvious links to Saw from Lucas's contribution, and it's even more Saw in the DLC 21. You have hints of cannibalism with the opening dinner scene seeming to contain human organs, isolation, viruses with the films such as The Crazies or 28 Days Later, body horror such as The Fly for Marguerite's final form, paranormal and haunted house for some sections with the way that Evie projects herself, also making it fall into the creepy kid category for good measure. What I'm getting at is with underlying genres, it is a great way to ensure that your audience are at least creeped out by something, as one type of shock or horror to one person may not affect another. There's a great Stephen King quote that I love, which is, "There are 3 types of terror: the gross out, the sight of a severed head tumbling down a flight of stairs. It's when the lights go out and something green and slimy splatters against your arm. The horror, the unnatural, spiders the size of bears, the dead waking up and walking around. It's when the lights go out and something with claws grabs you by the arm. And the last and worst one, terror. When you come home and notice everything you own had been taken away and replaced by an exact substitute. It's when the lights go out and you feel something behind you. You hear it, you feel its breath against your ear. But when you turn around, there's nothing there." I feel this perfectly categorises the main elements of horror within Resident Evil 7. The gross out being the rotting house, the cannibalism, the gore, the bugs, and the body horror. The horror consists of the unnatural beings present in the house and the abnormal abilities and unpredictability of the Bakers. And the terror being the looming fear around every corner and the chilling isolation and desperation you feel that you're always at risk or never going to escape. Unlike most first-person horror titles, Ethan isn't completely a mute. He does have some dialogue here and there which help us in ways get to know his emotional involvement with the situations present. It is extremely important to have likeable characters and a good story, in order for the audience to connect with them and feel a part of the pain or joy at the protagonist's failures or successes. One benefit to Ethan keeping quiet during most of the game's runtime, which I believe was intentional, was that it helps you, the player, really slip into those shoes and immerse yourselves in the nightmare. You yourself start to feel like you are Ethan. Your choices really take a toll and you start to really ask yourself, what would I do in this situation? Would I put my life in danger for my loved ones? Is Mia beyond saving? How did I get caught up in all of this? This is also aided by the fact you play the entire game in first person and never fully see Ethan's face. It always seems to be blocked or obscured by something. This helps Ethan become more of a vehicle for the player rather than his own separate entity. If Ethan was to constantly talk to himself like, "Right, maybe there's a key around that hallway I passed earlier. I should go check it out." It would really divide you from Ethan and make him feel too separate, which again breaks the immersion and reminds you are playing a video game. I believe the creative team wanted a more stripped back horror experience you could really get invested in. Obviously there is some crazy, impossible shit going down, but it still feels very grounded, and not that it's completely unbelievable within this newly presented world. And what a world it is. This game has some incredibly detailed environments. This helps the house feel very lived in, and things are presented in such a way that you feel every nook and cranny search is rewarding with, if not items, further information on the history of this home. The RE engine brings these environments to life really well, and I remember the first time I saw the teasers for this, I thought I'd never seen better graphics in a game before. The lighting and just everything seemed perfect. I've never tried the game in VR, which I'm guessing immerses you even more. I remember Numskull actually released a 4D candle, which apparently was supposed to be used during the VR gameplay, to further bring you into that world. I remember smelling it once and it was revolting. It was supposed to smell of wood, sweat, blood and fear, whatever that smells like. One of the other great features helping draw you even further into this new world is the amazing sound design and original score.
今までこう音がずっと鳴り続けることでユーザー、プレイヤーはある程度こう道筋というかその手すりを捕まった状態でゲームを進行してると思うんだけど、例えば環境音が鳴る、自分の足音も聞こえたりとかすることで自分が今どういう状況かどういう周りにいるのかっていうのが分かってる状態で進んでると思うんだけど、そのタイミングで無音にポンってしてあげる、要はサイレンスをかけてあげると今までその情報があったものが一切バッとなくなってしまうのね。だから言ったらビジュアル的に言うと光があったものがいきなり闇に変わるみたいな。
The sound design of changing environments around yourself, either played on a surround sound system or through headphones, is super effective and really puts you on edge as you can just gauge on enemies' distances from the echoes of their taunts and footsteps, causing you not only to play based on your eyes, but your ears as well. The score, on the other hand, is very subtle, but for good reason. I've always loved the music throughout the early Resident Evil games. However, actual songs with identifiable instruments playing on a loop every time you enter a certain area seems to be too unnatural. Apart from the save room and Go Tell Aunt Rhody, which actually brilliantly hides a lot of plot in its lyrics.
ゲーム中に、少女だったり老婆だったりが口ずさむっていう、曲、っていうものが一つあったんですね。でそこで、童謡はどうだろうっていう話になりまして、で
実はあれにはちゃんと設定が実は作られてたんですあって、でそこに見合ったようなその歌詞を入れて、あの曲の歌詞にして、で、あの曲をそのテーマとして使ったっていう。
Go tell Aunt Rhody, go tell Aunt Rhody, go tell Aunt Rhody, old Grey Goose is dead.
I can't think of one track I heard repeat or even sound very similar to another. They all tend to blend flawlessly without you even realising it's going on. The character progression throughout the game is very well paced and helps you feel that in this short time you've been through the mill. You've seen some shit and you're ready to take it down. By the end of the game, you are so much more empowered than that cowering wreck you were at the very beginning. After a monster of an unforgiving intro, you are left to sneak around unfamiliar territory armed with nothing, Jack patrolling the halls and taunting you, only to turn a corner and freak out to find him inches from your face. You start to get hold of a knife and a pistol, but not much ammo, to then find Jack shrugs bullets like they're water off a duck's back. You spend so much time crouched behind furniture and at corners peering out, hoping no one is there, and by the end of the game you're charging on through hordes of moulded armed with shotguns, grenade launchers, magnums, remote bombs, and you are just wrecking SOBs left, right and centre. You really start to build confidence in your choices and adapt in playstyle as the game goes through on to a point where you'd be glad to see Jack come running at you with his rake now, just so you could pump him full of lead. It really makes you want to continue with the game when you're rewarded with finding more powerful weapons and items giving you that little bit more of an advantage. It makes it up to you for how frustrating the first sections of the game can be when you feel powerless. However, the enemy types tend to get tougher and more present as the game goes on, as not to make it too much of an easy ride for you. But by this point you feel like you can pretty much take on anything. And speaking of enemy types, another complaint I hear a lot is that the enemy types aren't diverse enough. They're just slight variations of each other. The way I see it is that it makes it seem more realistic. From my understanding, the moulded are created with the help of Evelyn's mutamycete fungus taking over dead bodies and reanimating them, as we see in the European version of the game happen to the deputy from the beginning. They tend to dissolve upon you leaving a room, so I'm not quite sure how that works if they're affected by the light, because certain lit areas don't seem to affect them at all. But I think it's to surprise you more when you enter an empty room and they just start generating from the floor or walls. But I look at it like the xenomorph. I think it takes on a slightly different form depending on what it's born out of. And from that note at the beginning showing the successfully turned victims and dead ones, I picture based on the subject's prior form, the moulded turn out slightly differently. Maybe they're standard for your average size male and female, then the vomiting ones were burlier men, or given heavier dosages. The fast ones were once animals or trespassing dogs maybe. Well, I know that's not ever confirmed. I like to think that's the reason they're in that design. But I think again it's more realistic for the main sub-enemies of the game to all be similar with only slight differences. If it takes place in one location, and the cause of the enemies is one source, it would seem strange for a completely unrelated monster to turn up out of the blue, which has nothing to do with the moulded. However, I see people's point that it may have switched up the combat and difficulty level a bit more. If you couldn't just get enough of the bakers once you'd finished the main game, don't worry, as Capcom have you covered on the DLC front. The first DLC announced was a short side campaign where you play as the newly designed Chris Redfield in Not a Hero. Not a Hero was delayed for some time due to the creative members not wanting to release a product tied to Resident Evil 7, which wasn't of the same quality or standard as the main campaign. The gameplay is more fast paced and definitely scratches that itch for the players more accustomed to the newer shooter and action heavy titles in the series. The game takes place right after Ethan and Mia are extracted from the Baker home. Chris, now working for Blue Umbrella, heads down into the Abercrombie salt mine seen at the end of the main game to pursue Lucas in order to stop him giving further intel on Evelyn to a crime syndicate focused on bioweapons known as the Connections. It reminds me quite a bit of the Separate Ways campaign from Resident Evil 4 where you play as Ada, within the same kind of timescale, but you see how events play out from different perspectives. Plus it gives Lucas a bit more screen time for those who were wondering whatever happened to him. Capcom also released this DLC for free, which I think was a nice touch in a world of microtransactions. End of Zoe is also a short side campaign where you take control of a new character, Joe, which is Jack's brother. He is an absolute unit and can pretty much kill any moulded with his bare hands. There's punch combos and boxing effigies to pick up around the game, making your attack power stronger. It definitely alleviates the whole ammo issue for this new game mode, but dealing groups of moulded uppercuts and watching their heads burst from thundering haymakers is so satisfying. It is relatively short, but gives the player some closure on whatever happened to Zoe after you didn't pick to cure her with the serum. Joe's voice acting is quite comical in parts, and you get to go toe to toe a few rounds with mutated Jack. You later find a device which makes your punches super powerful, which makes the fights a bit more entertaining, so you do get the odd upgrade here and there. Instead of combining ammo, you create spears out of tree branches and scrap metal. These are used to clear out the lakes of any gators. You also eat critters. You can mix them with chem fluid to create first aid med, or just choose to eat grubs and centipede off of trees and under rocks. A real mountain man. I'd say these are seen as the more story focused DLCs, and others I'll list are more mini games and short episodes to give more clarification on what happened to certain characters. The banned footage tapes contain a mixed bag of additional content. Volume 1 gives you Bedroom, Nightmare and Ethan Must Die. Bedroom follows a puzzle-solving based episode where you play as Clancy from the Sewer Gators. You are locked up in the main house's bedroom with Marguerite checking in on you in intervals. You must get out and quickly search the room and solve puzzles without leaving the room any different than when she last came in. Hearing her scream as she comes up those stairs whilst you panic about if you've remembered to put the painting back in the right section really is the stuff of nightmares.
Who's making that noise?
And talking of nightmares, Nightmare is a round survival type minigame where you play as another crew member of the Sewer Gators, fighting hordes of enemies whilst being trapped in the basement. You're on a timer to last until the morning. You can create scrap which you craft items with from the workbench. It is pretty intense, and when Jack shows up, you best be ready. Ethan Must Die is an extra high difficulty challenge in which the game decides to go full Dark Souls on you. At first it seems near impossible, but if you feel Madhouse wasn't hard enough and you're up for the challenge, it can be a laugh. Volume 2 consists of 3 parts as well. These are Daughters, a prequel set 3 years before the main game where you play as Zoe and see the arrival of Evelyn after the boat incident. It's actually a great addition to see how these people's lives were before Evelyn came along, as Jack and Marguerite seem so sweet and caring. It just adds to that impact of knowing how much their lives got ruined by Evelyn's arrival. Also, on a side note, I love the Baker's main house. Like, if I was to win the lottery, I would have it built to live in. I know that sounds crazy, but I really like the layout, especially seeing it in Daughters, where everything is still nice and neat and laid out the way it should be. This episode has 2 outcomes. One sees you try to escape after getting hold of car keys, after the Bakers go nuts almost immediately after Evie's arrival. There's a power outage and you walk the halls completely unarmed with only your lighter to find Marguerite spewing bugs in your face when you check on her. Jack tries to help you but just turns out even worse after mutilating himself with a knife, then chasing you around the house. You must escape, however the 2 methods you take affect the ending. The true ending requires a bit more thorough investigation, but does add a bit of runtime to an otherwise short game mode. The other game modes included a 21, a game of sadistic Saw-inspired blackjack. It is super addictive and quite tactful. Each losing hand either electrocutes you or cuts off your fingers one at a time until you or your opponent die.
What? Wait! You psycho fuck, you really did it! Hell of a game, right?
And the most fun and comical of them all is Jack's 55th birthday. You basically run around on a timer throughout various areas of the main game, killing moulded in party hats and bosses to extend your time further and unlock other rooms to find Jack food. Because boy is he hungry. It's spread out all over the house and you must run around grabbing cakes, wine and other dishes to satisfy Jack's hunger. The music and Jack's one-liners are hilarious and really provide some fun comic relief after such a dark and intense game.
I don't think I can eat any more.
I must also point out that Madhouse difficulty for the main game is unlocked after once completing the game on normal. It does have some very interesting changes and is a real test of survival. Jack is much more persistent and can walk faster than you can run. Enemies do a lot more damage and later enemies appear earlier. Certain key items have changed positions around the house and the boss fights are extremely stressful. It is a real challenge but worth seeing through to unlock infinite ammo, which can then be used on any new game or difficulty. A great way to relax after taking such a hammering on Madhouse, if you just want to achievement hunt on easy. This game really had some great marketing, which I've got to touch on briefly. A year before the game's announcement at E3 2015, to gauge how players would react to the Resident Evil engine's graphical abilities and the new use of VR, a short demo called Kitchen was playable at the show. The T in Kitchen was also a 7, to add a further clue, however it went largely unnoticed. It features Pete from the Sewer Gators attempting to help you escape from captivity. The game's announcement was then followed by a playable demo named The Beginning Hour. It was stated that this would not be featured in the final product, but is simply to show the gameplay, graphical polish of this new engine, and to get a taste of the tone. Some later updates to the demo called Twilight Hour and Midnight Hour were released, adding new areas, and I can tell people were just praying for an answer to what is that dummy finger about. There were whole prediction videos just dedicated to this. However, it was implemented into a secret puzzle on the final demo, which helped you unlock a dirty coin which carries over to the main game once released. I made a tutorial video on this very demo. The actor who also played Pete in the demo also sent camcorder footage on VHS tapes, complete with the VCRs to play them, to IGN, GameSpot, Polygon, etc. Featuring a cry for help announcing the other crew members were dead or missing. This tape has to get to this specific company. Before being murdered himself. This was a genius publicity stunt to promote the new game's release, and I thought it was awesome.
This is bad.
Real bad. Andre's dead. He's bleeding from his fucking eyes, leaking blood all over. And Clancy, I don't even know where the fuck he went. The Baker family, batshit fucking crazy. Ah! This tape, you gotta get it to Polygon. You hear me? Get it to Polygon. Whatever. Ah! What the fuck? I can't take this anymore. These people, these freaks. You gotta get the tape. You gotta get here. You gotta. Ah!
Certain collector's editions were announced for pre-order. It was mainly between three: the Japanese collector's edition, the US GameStop exclusive collector's edition, and the European collector's edition, which I did actually pre-order, but unfortunately due to transit issues the model houses were all damaged, so no one could collect these till more were shipped over. An interactive experience was set up in London days before the game's release, which I'm so bummed I never got to go to. It was part of a tour where you're in an escape room type situation with actors playing the Bakers. They also had set up VR demos there so you could also experience the game as well as the escape room. Extremely short teasers were released weekly by Capcom, giving brief glances at gameplay, which I was dying with anticipation for every time a new one was uploaded. The hype for this game, in my own experience anyway, was phenomenal. I don't think I'd ever been so happy to get my hands on a Resident Evil game. I also convinced a friend who had never really gotten into the series to pick it up. It was just so great conversing on it and which part are you up to. I'll make sure when you get to this section that you have that on you. I don't think I'd had a discussion so excitedly on progression of a video game since school. Capcom really put a lot of time and effort into this title, and seemed to be much more focused on delivering a game which is consistently more terrifying than anything in the later entries, and really earns the genre tier of survival horror. At its core you have so much great material to analyse, and although I understand you can never please everyone, I was amazed with the final product and I'm so glad it turned out the way it did. My one and only real gripe with the game, I would say, and I think most people would agree with me, is the boat section as Mia. It was possibly to break up the areas a bit more, as to not get stale, keep trudging through the same old houses over and over again. However, I think it just feels like padding, and I would have been fine with some cutscene briefly depicting the events of the boat section, or just the tape alone. I'm sure the players would have been able to still get the picture. But I tend to have this as a reoccurring thing with the Resident Evil series. I always absolutely love the first couple of areas, then dislike where they end up. Now, on where this entry fits in. There's a whole plethora of fans of Resident Evil, die-hard fans of just classic style Resident Evil, or with devotion to maybe just one entry that they enjoy more so than others, lovers of all things Resident Evil, and more casual fans who have maybe just got into the series off of friends' recommendations. All of these elements make it tricky to collectively agree among fans which game deserves more praise than others, as they all have different elements to offer. Personally, I grew up watching my older cousins play it as a kid, so I kind of understood what the games were. Then when I was old enough and got a PlayStation, I started to get the original games as gifts, which I still own and treasure dearly to this day. I started getting more and more into other game series and genres, and had a break from Resident Evil for a few years, until my friend received Resident Evil 4 for Christmas one year, and I was amazed. I knew I had to have it, and even remember my trip to the store to purchase it with my pocket money. It was different, but with the moving time of where games were going and the new hardware, it felt like a good change. I fixated on 4 for a while, then with the first HD re-release a few years ago I went back to it and made my mind up. This was it. This is my favourite game of all time. But I got way too comfortable with it, and maybe decided it was my favourite because I enjoyed the ride, but as I knew it so well, it had become more scenic than anything and there was no real challenge there. I knew I could just kind of stick it on and have a good time and see it through without any hardships. It was my first Let's Play on this channel, and I set myself the task of going back to the originals and playing through the first 3. And upon returning to them as an adult, I really underestimated how groundbreaking these games were for their time. I found myself getting more and more into them and coming to the realisation that wait, hold on, maybe 4 isn't true Resident Evil. Maybe this is what it's all about. And this is where it often divides. I feel that Resident Evil spawned something special, and like when a band maybe first breaks after releasing their debut album, they feel on top of the world with their initial success. Nothing else to follow could really live up to that first time in retrospect. But as many people know, times change, influences change, and people start to experiment. You'll always have people who say things such as, I like the first album, but everything after that got a bit shit. And likewise, you'll have people going, oh, I like the new album, but I don't like that earlier heavy stuff they used to play. Although maybe things get newer and shinier, if you keep the same format for too long, people will get bored of it. This not only applies for Resident Evil 1 to 3, but with 4 to 6 as well. And that's not just from the fans' perspective. Capcom were already heading in a much more action-orientated style with the early concept of Resident Evil 3. 4 was the first big change, but was received well. This gave Capcom the hope that they could try new things without losing too much of the fan base. But after sticking with this new style, they knew it was losing potency, so they wanted to redesign the game's format, but it definitely is a tightrope. Although it was with a new lick of paint, Resident Evil really seemed to be back. What makes each title fit in, I think, depends completely on the fans' perception of what true Resident Evil is. I understand the fundamental things the entries need, however I wouldn't want every new Resident Evil game to be a carbon copy of the one before. Titles like 7 break you out of that stalemate and surprise you. And although some may see it as the black sheep of the numbered entries in the family, there will always be a seat at my table for it. Capcom seems to have gotten back on their feet with this entry, and are continuing to be on a winning streak with the recent success of the Resident Evil 2 remake, which I feel was absolutely fantastic. Although Capcom like trying new material, they do know when to play the hits from time to time. I never thought it would happen really, and although it doesn't overtake my favouritism for the original Resident Evil 2, I feel it will help shape where 8 will be heading, and we get some more great Resident Evil games for the future. But whatever the Resident Evil series holds in store for us, whether you enjoy the older or newer games, I'm grateful to Capcom for providing millions of horror fans around the globe with a library of unmatched games to either relive out that classic nostalgia of booting up your old PS1 and playing through with friends on a dark night, or to promote discussion amongst fans whetting appetites with new and exciting news from time to time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. It took me a while to try and put together my views on the game and what I wanted to discuss the most. Your views, likes and subscriptions make all of this worthwhile. Thank you very much, and until next time, I've been your host, JP Twinesiger.